Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 120 of the Sports Daily College Basketball Podcast. I'm your host, Sean Vowells. I've got Mike Koomar with me. And, Mike, we're in a little bit of, final season. A lot of games last weekend, a lot of games this upcoming weekend. We're going to try and bridge the gap between the two. Um, but this is pretty much it for non conference play. We've got a couple of, one offs there in February, like Duke and Michigan, but this weekend is it for for non-conference play before we turn it over to the conference play for the rest of the year. But Mike, we are going to start with last Saturday's games. Obviously, there were sort of a few days ago, so we're not going to spend too much on them. But we're going to start with Arkansas. I'm wearing the hat right now. A big
Big.
win for them and a big sort of couple of weeks for them. Like they had a really tough schedule. We talked about it. They get the win against Texas Tech. Wasn't all easy. Certainly, Texas Tech led by 6 at halftime, but a great second half led by Trayvon Brazil. Arkansas seems to be passing some of these tests that John Calipari has given them here in December.
Yeah, real balanced attack for Arkansas in this game. Carter Knox had 20. Darius Acuff had 20 as well. DJ Wagner actually surprisingly didn't have a whole lot of production in this game numbers wise, just 4 points. But nevertheless, it seems like a pretty balanced attack. They even get a lot of production coming off the bench with Ewan Richmond and Malik Thomas. So this is a team that seems to be getting into peak form. And don't be surprised when they get into the middle of SEC play and they're competing for a conference championship game. You look at the SEC, we're talking about how it's a little bit of a down year right now in the Southeastern Conference. Vanderbilt looks really good. Alabama's had their moments, but for the most part, this is kind of a down year for the conference. You look at a couple of games that they've lost, a really tight one to what we now know is a really good Michigan State ball club, and then a 9 point loss against Duke. This is a really good Arkansas team, convincingly beating Texas Tech team, a really good second half in this one. So hard to not like the Razorbacks as they get ready to play another Big 12 team in the Houston Cougars, this time in a different type of neutral court. The other one, a neutral court where you had a lot of fans from each team. This one, not so much. Going to be at the Rock in Newark.
Yeah, so they beat Louisville, big test win at home. They pretend neutral like you said, Mike, in Dallas, which obviously Texas better than I do. Like, is it a day trip from Lubbock?
It's yeah. So I
Yeah,
mean, Dallas is the
like two
highest
hours.
concentration of both Arkansas and Texas Tech grads. So that's as neutral as it gets.
Yeah,
And I would imagine that that was about 8,000 to 8,000 split in terms of
and it
fans.
was pretty like the Texas Tech had the momentum in the first half. You could hear the crowd, and then flip that the other way around for the second half. But Arkansas seems to be the formula seems to be working, Mike. And like you said, it doesn't. There's not one way that this team can win games. They have eight like really solid players who average at least 15 minutes a game, and eight players who average at least 5 points a game. And that's Nick Pringle's the lowest, and he's a senior who's played a lot of basketball, at Alabama and South Carolina. Like the guy doesn't, not going to win any All American awards, but he's a pretty good. He's pretty
Yeah.
good if he's your eighth guy. But the formula seems to be working. And Mike, let's turn the page to this game on Saturday against Houston because it's really going under the radar with how big of a game this is. This is a game that includes two ranked teams here in the top 15 at the Prudential Center. Houston, I feel like we haven't seen a lot of them. Not as much as some of these other teams that have really tested themselves here. Houston does have the loss, which I believe was in Vegas, and then Arkansas at 9-2, probably a better resume right now, despite having another loss. But this is a game that I could see really going either way. I think the spread will probably be close. Analytically has it pretty close, but this is a great chance for one of these teams to pick up a quad one win before conference play.
Yeah, I mean, you look at Houston so far this year, and their schedule really hasn't been a whole lot of convincing. They had that 1 point win against Auburn, but aside from that, nothing really sticks out on their resume. Yeah, they beat Notre Dame by 10, they beat Florida State. Those aren't particularly impressive victories when you're talking top 25, quad one, build your resume type wins. So they're ranked seventh in the country, but a lot of that has to deal with, how successful they were last season. So we're looking into this Arkansas game. This is their first. Well, Tennessee was a big test. This is their second test. We'll see how they can respond. They've had, a few pretty cupcake games back to back with Jackson State and UNO. So we'll see. I think right now Houston matches up really well against uh, against Arkansas, especially with their experience in the front court. But when you look at the backcourt of Arkansas, that is where they're going to be able to make their bread and butter, especially if you look at how successful those guards have been this year. So early on, I'm looking at the advantage to the Arkansas Razorbacks.
And I've got the Torvik page here up, Mike, as you were talking. They are still fourth in the country, so I think it is like a little bit premature to say like they're not elite. But Auburn has shown they beat Auburn by 1 point. I don't want to say they were lucky to win that. Could have gone either way. Auburn has shown that they're an all right team, but they're definitely a step below the elite teams that they've played, like a game that we're going to talk about later. They've gotten blown out twice against really good teams. And then Tennessee has had a couple of poor performances this year, and then the other games are the other games. But I think Houston is looking for this, stamp 11-1, and they do have another non-conference game after. So, but they're gonna if they have one loss going into the Big 12, I think we'll be thinking, all right, if they win this league, they could be a 1 or 2 seed. You know, nothing really is worried. But if they lose it, Mike, the lack of a real non-conference win can cost you when you're at the top of the pile like this in the tournament. Like they might be a push down to a 3 or 4 seed, even though they might be like analytically top 10. So this is a really important one for them. Probably more important for them than Arkansas. Arkansas already has the Louisville win, already has the Texas Tech on a neutral. Those are going to stay quad one. And they've got a chance to get a third one here, at least. Let me just double check real quick. Yeah, so 2 quad one wins, and then 2 quad one losses. And it doesn't look like they have one quad three and the rest quad four. So, look, they're going to want to stamp here on their non-conference too. But it should be a good one on Saturday in New Jersey. I will be there rooting for the Hogs, as you can probably tell with the hat that I'm wearing. All right. Also, last Saturday, Mike, we had the number 1 team in the country and the number 2 team in the country both in action. Let's start with number 1, Arizona. They played against Alabama, CM Newton Classic on a neutral. And this one, the final score doesn't really tell the story. Bama was winning at halftime, but a total onslaught from the Wildcats in the second half, 57-34. And Arizona walks away with a 21-point victory. Mike, every time we come on here, we continue to raise the bar for Arizona.
Absolutely. And don't be fooled too by this being a neutral court game. This was in Birmingham,
Yeah.
Alabama. So this is the CM Newton Classic. Alabama plays this game every year in Birmingham. And what a dominant second half that Arizona had, scoring 57 points. They were just lights out from the field. And this kind of seems like the same old recipe for Arizona. Koa Pete didn't have a very good game in this one, but someone's there to pick him up. Braden Burry is another outstanding freshman, 28 points in this game. Jaden Bradley, 13, picked up 7 assists to go with it. This is a fantastic ball club. And whenever you're able to get in your scrubs and your walk-ons, that's a big victory. Being able to do that against a top 12 team on effectively a road game, I think this Arizona team continues to show why they're the number 1 team in the country ahead of Michigan, because they've had more of these, battle testing moments where they've come out on top. A lot of neutral court wins. And then in some of these other games, they've just been absolutely dominant. So, yeah, Arizona just continuing to dominate. Sean, we sold them short. We thought they were going to be
Yeah.
top 2 in the Big 12. They're number 1 in the country right now. So,
Yep.
so we messed up here. Our bad. We thought
We
they
messed up less than everybody else, though.
a lot less than
Yeah.
everybody else. We didn't think they were. We knew they were going to be good. We didn't know they were going to be this good.
And
Um,
and Mike, their tournament resume is definitely leaning them being ranked number 1 rather than Michigan. The analytics love Michigan because they just sort of crush everybody. But you have to think that even the analytics, the way that they're skewed with the neutral court games, probably still not favorable enough to Arizona. The Florida game was in Vegas. Let's call that a true neutral. The UCLA game was in Los Angeles, neutral, because it's where the Clippers played. They went on the road and beat UConn.
UConn.
They beat Auburn by a significant margin at home, and then they beat Alabama in another one of these neutral games that is, really not neutral. This was a road game for them. So it's going to show up with an N next to it on the team sheet in March, but we're just going to have to remember that it probably was a little bit more impressive than a typical neutral game. And then, of course, Mike, they have another neutral game this Saturday in Phoenix. So, a couple road neutrals. They get a home neutral here against San Diego State, who I have to double check where they are exactly in Torvik and all that. But this is another high
They're
quality
pretty far back.
opponent as Arizona wraps up the non-conference slate with two more bye games against Bethune-Cookman and South Dakota State. But Mike, we're gonna do a re-rack of our conference power rankings here before conference play starts. But it starts with Arizona, and then we start to think about who's next, right? In the Big 12.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. It seems like this is Arizona's league to lose right now. Look, Houston, when they take on Arizona, that is going to be cinema. You already know that's going to be a fantastic game. Brigham Young is going to bring the heat. That's going to be a tough place to play for Arizona. One, because of the crowd, the great crowd that they bring to the Marriott Center at BYU, but also because of the elevation. You know, that's a tough place to play. So there's a lot of great teams in the Big 12 this year, and you never know. Some of these other smaller teams are going to cap it off. Personally, I think the Big 12 is probably the best conference in college basketball right now. They kind of go back and forth with the Big 10, two best leagues right now, but they're they're going to have their hands full in conference play, but clearly the advantage goes to Arizona right now going into conference play.
And I was scrolling through Torvik here. There's like five top 15 teams in the Big 12, probably four in the Big 10. The Big 10 might end up with another team or two in the tournament, but at the top, it's pretty close. Probably 4.5 title threats in the Big 12 versus 3.5
Yeah.
in the Big 10. But yeah, the Big 12 is looking really good. We haven't really talked about Iowa State much, but nothing's really changed for them. They've been killing it. BYU, like you said, Kansas is in the top 15 in the net despite having three losses, and Peterson's been in and out of there. And then after that, Mike, there's a little bit of a drop off. There we have Texas Tech and Baylor. We talked about Tech. Baylor has been, kind of just looking like an 8-9 seed, like the whole
Yeah.
season.
Right.
They
10
can
seed. Yeah.
they're beating bad teams. They're losing to good teams. It's just going to be about what they can do when they play teams in the same realm as them. But let's go down a little bit. The I keep mixing up Oklahoma State game was Oklahoma State rolled into this one undefeated on the year. Porter Moser already had three losses. Pressure was starting to build a little bit there in Oklahoma. They go to Oklahoma City, and it's Oklahoma that gets the victory here in Bedlam. Were you a little bit surprised to see the Sooners out on top here?
I think this was a really high pressure game. Obviously, it's a rivalry game for both teams, and maybe Oklahoma State carries a little more of that weight, that chip on their shoulder after Oklahoma left the conference a couple of years back. But it felt like Oklahoma knew they had a lot of pressure in this game, and
Yeah,
they executed. They executed phenomenally in this game. Xavier Brown had 21 points in this one. He looked phenomenal. Nigel Pack, that's a throwback, right? Miami guy,
still here.
K-State guy. He was phenomenal for a while. Well, he's on the Sooners now, and he finally had a big game. He's really been struggling this year, especially in some of their losses. So it's good to see the senior finally show out and ball out here in a rivalry game. Look, Oklahoma State, we thought, or not we, but a lot of people thought they were going to be the worst team in the Big 12 this year. So, maybe this is a little bit of a back to reality for Oklahoma State. They looked fine. They competed for this game, but it certainly felt like Oklahoma wanted it more and throughout the game. That's at least what I thought when watching this one. And I also thought that Oklahoma State, maybe they're not as good as we, maybe thought a week ago.
And the analytics would suggest, Mike, that we might be entering a water is returning to its level stage with a couple of these teams that were undefeated, played a few okay teams, but nobody great in the non-conference, and then like the analytics are telling us that they're in the 40s and 50s, which is roughly the bubble. But they're undefeated, and like Seton Hall's another good example. Their strength of schedule hasn't been great. They have one loss to a solid team. Um, they're like I think right next to Oklahoma State in the rankings. But I think another team that can be applied to is Vanderbilt, where now that's a little bit of a different level. They're like in the teens. But do you think we're going to start seeing these records in a long term, not just here for Oklahoma State, but do you think we're going to see the records start to catch up with what the numbers are telling us here in terms of how the pecking order is going to be rolling out in these conferences?
100%. You're gonna see it come out. And like a great example there was Seton Hall. They had a good run in Maui, but they really haven't played anybody that spectacular in the out of conference. For them, granted, they play in probably the easiest of the Power Five conferences, so maybe it affects them less than others. Well, you want 100% expect that. I think in the Big 12, you'll see that with Oklahoma State, with Colorado, with Central Florida. You'll definitely see them level out. So there's plenty of these schools. You saw it with Ole Miss a couple years ago. They were undefeated with an easy out of conference schedule. Got into SEC play. They didn't even make the tournament. So this really is about the time when things start to level out in terms of the pretenders and the people that are here to stay in the conference. And some of those teams have 3, 4 losses right now. Look, you look at Kansas right now. Kansas is 9-3. I legitimately think that they're probably the most improved team since the start of the year up to this point because of Darian Peterson's departure. And I expect them
And
to rise
return
up.
and then departure again. But
Yeah,
yeah,
well, exactly. But they're a better team for it right now. They're battle tested, and I do think that this Kansas team right now, can make a run at getting a protected seed come March Madness.
yeah, they already have two quad one wins, just three losses overall. They have played um, five quad one games. They played seven games in the top two quads, and like they're like a solid team. Will they win the title? Probably not, but like I've got their resume here. Like we were a little bit worried after the North Carolina game where Peterson was in foul trouble and when he was off the floor they were like awful. They've started to figure some things out a little bit. They competed against Duke without him. They were able to beat Tennessee. They were able to beat Missouri. And then in the NC State game, he leaves with cramps, and Melvin Council turns into Steph Curry, hits 9 threes, and gets them over the line at NC State. So I think they're probably gonna be without Peterson. He's probably gonna be out here and there. Hamstring's not something that gets back to 100% immediately.
Yeah.
I think they have learned some valuable lessons here, Mike, on how to win without him, or at least how to play, solid enough basketball without him. Where when he comes back, they don't have to roll him out there for 35 minutes. Maybe you can, let's get him through this game at 20 minutes and then 25. But they're probably the best team with three losses in the country. I'd have to think off the top of my head, and they have learned how to play without him. And this, like, it's I don't think it's a maybe anymore, Mike. This will benefit them in the long term.
Absolutely. And you look at, I don't know if there's a school that's played more Power Five opponents.
Yeah,
I could be wrong. I'm just looking at their schedule. They
seven
played eight
top
Power Five
two,
teams.
seven quad one or two games. That seems like a lot.
Yeah, eight Power Four teams.
Yeah,
So they've, pretty stacked out of conference play here, and then they're going to get ready to play in, the best conference of college basketball right now. So Kansas is going to be battle tested coming into conference play. That's why I give them an advantage over a team like Texas Tech that's 0-3 against ranked teams this year. Tech has really shown us a whole lot of nothing right now. I'm waiting to see it. I know they're a good team, but if I had to put the matchup between those two, I might put Kansas as the fifth, fourth or fifth best team in the conference right now.
yeah. It seems like Texas Tech is one sort of a one trick pony when Anderson and Toppin are going. That they are really good, and when like teams take like one of them out of the game in the very slightest, they're gonna get beat by a lot. It's happened a few times now with Purdue in Bahamas, and then like I know they didn't lose by a lot here against Arkansas, Mike, but they were like thoroughly beaten in the second half. Like
Yeah.
to
Oh yeah. They
they
were
were
beat bad.
like never gonna win that game once 10 minutes left hit. But the
And,
Big
and I'll
12,
say, I'll
Yeah,
say
go
one
ahead.
more thing about the Big 12 too, and things are going to shift a little bit also, I think, when you look at these teams, when you get to actually playing home and away games.
Yeah.
Like the atmospheres in the Big 12 are so tough to play in outside of conference, especially with how talented some of these middle tier teams are. A lot better than we initially expected. Expect Houston to go into Manhattan, Kansas against Kansas State and have their hands full. It's going to happen. Like these places are really tough places to play. And some of these schools haven't seen an environment like this night in and night out where every single game is going to be a dogfight. So like anything could happen once you get into conference play here.
And the strength of this league, Mike, will be those home games. I think the numbers are telling us that basically Baylor to TCU, there's 5 teams. They're all in the top 60, and then you have Cincy, Arizona State, Kansas State, Colorado, all in the top 80. Like all of those are quad one road games, like roughly, it's top
Yeah.
75 on the road. So like, are those teams good enough to get those wins, or are they not? Like that might be a good indicator on the strength of this league, whether team 8 can beat team 2 when team 2 is on the road. And it might be it not might, it will be the factor on how many teams this conference gets in, because they're in a pretty good spot right now. I know everyone likes to look at the top few teams, um, to see like, where do they come in the analytics. But it's really the middle of the conference that matters for these things, because the middle of the conference is going to be teams that are winning and losing quite often. So
Yeah.
that's sort of what the strength of the league is. And Big 12 is in a good spot here where, maybe if a couple of teams could fall off, that would be good. And then it looks like it's going to be a dogfight at the top here, Mike. I don't know if anybody's winning. Yeah, I don't know if anybody's losing like 1 or 2 games in the conference. I think we might have a winner with 3 or 4 losses.
You very well could. We've seen years where conference champion was a five loss, split champion between Baylor and Kansas. This might be one of those years. I still think that Arizona is going to probably pull away from the rest of the field. So I like them to probably win with you know two, three, 4 losses. But with that being said, there's going to be a dogfight at that number 2 spot. My prediction in the Big 12. And there's going to be a lot of losses from a lot of really good teams in this conference.
Yeah, let's go to a couple other games on Saturday here, Mike, and let's go to the Seattle Hoops showdown. Gonzaga final score was Gonzaga 82, UCLA 72. Gonzaga has proven again that they have just totally put that loss to Michigan at Players Era behind them. They are back winning quad one games. They're 10-1. Where do you think that they fall in the pecking order here? Do you think that they should be up there with the title contenders, or do you think they're more in that second tier with, Arkansas and Louisville and that sort of Sweet
It's
16, maybe Final 14, but probably not Natty.
Gonzaga is such a tough team to get a beat on because while they look really good right now, look, a lot more teams are going to be better battle tested going through their conference. So it's not to say that Gonzaga is going to regress throughout the season, but they're probably not going to progress at the same level by blowing out Portland and San Francisco and San Diego State and Pepperdine.
Yeah,
It's just not, we're comparing apples to oranges there in terms of the schedule.
and
With that being said,
I've got the WCC up here, Mike, and we talked about how Colorado, who's second to last in the Big 12, was 79th in Torvik
yeah,
here. Just 3 teams in the WCC are above that. Gonzaga, St. Mary's, obviously, and then Santa Clara, who is carving out a little bit of an at-large resume here. But your point is pretty clearly made here with this, with how the WCC lines up. They have to sort of front load their schedule with non-conference games. I think for the most part they've looked pretty good, and they do not have a non-conference game out here in the middle of the conference play like they did a couple years ago with Kentucky. But until they go to a different conference, which will be happening next year, we're kind of gonna set it and forget it with Gonzaga, and we're gonna say, all right, we'll see you in the 116 or 215 game, and see you in a couple
yeah.
months.
I think one of the issues for Gonzaga right now is a lot of these games they scheduled to be really tough games are not really looking to be that. Creighton is not a very good ball club. Kentucky is not looking very good. They blew them out. Not very, very impressive. Maryland's solid. right? That's a quality win, and so is UCLA. But Oklahoma also, that's not really that crazy significant of a win. Arizona State's, they're okay. But I think some of these games that they expected to be, top 15, top 10 teams going into postseason, they're just not that.
And you you'd have to think at least the first three power conference games are worse off than what we thought they'd be at the beginning of the year. You have Oklahoma and Creighton, who you beat at home, who are outside the top 50. Look, they're not going to drop to 75, so those will be quad two games. Arizona State away, they're 74th right now, so that's probably going to jockey between quad one and quad two. You have Alabama, Michigan, and Kentucky on neutrals, and UCLA. Those will all stay quad one, but Maryland is outside the top 100 right now. So, they have to stay in the top 100 to get that game to quad two, which is not right now. So, it's like this should have been like way more quad one games and definite quad two games, not, well, if this stays here, it stays quad two. Unfortunately for them, it's just sort of not really their fault, but it's sort of what happened. And, they do play Oregon here on Sunday, Mike, on a neutral. Again, that's another example. Like Oregon's outside the top 100 in the net. And the predictives, which have some preseason expectations in here, are still holding on to Oregon around that 75 mark. But, eventually those two are going to catch up with each other. So
Yeah.
probably like three tournament teams. There are three teams that they thought would be tournament teams are clearly not so far. So
Yeah.
they might be in like run it up mode to cover some of these, keep the analytics high, and then try and beat St. Mary's, who they have had. I don't have the series off the top of my head, but they've lost some games to St. Mary's over the years, and St.
Yeah, I
Mary's
think
is
they
really
lost
good.
they lost two of them last year, I
Yeah.
know. Yeah.
And then, you have Santa Clara too. They're a top 50 team in the net right now, so maybe if they can stay there, that'll get you two more wins. But
Yeah.
Mike, it's very likely that like 80% of Gonzaga's resume is already done, and it's not even January yet.
Yeah. No, absolutely.
All right, well, we've got some Big Ten games on Saturday that may have been a little bit shocking. We had Nebraska go on the road and beat Illinois. This was a couple days ago, Mike, but any sort of thoughts on how Nebraska was able to get the job done here?
Look, I mean, a buzzer beating three to seal the deal in one of the tougher places to play in the Big Ten. Look, Illinois, there's no surprise here, is one of the hot and cold, irregular teams in college basketball, and I don't think there's an exception this year. But there's something to be said about how impressive Nebraska's doing, specifically in the last few games. Um, Dominating their rival Creighton. We know Creighton's not what they usually are, but still 21-point victory there. Following that up with a 30-point victory at home against Wisconsin, and then going to Champaign and getting an upset victory. So this is, the most surprising team in the Big Ten for sure. And you start to wonder if they're going to be able to compete in conference. It had a pretty easy out of conference schedule, but this win against Illinois, shocking and really encouraging for Husker Nation.
And this was a moment for them, Mike, where they go on the road to a team that's ranked better than them. Is this the moment where the numbers were going to catch up with the record? Not so fast, Jamarcus Lawrence. He
Yeah.
knocks in the three. They skyrocket up the rankings. They're 22nd in Torvik, 14th in the net. Like, obviously, you can't do better than win every single game in the non-conference, and you'd have to think that they do. They've got 336 New Hampshire and 340 North Dakota to wrap up non-con. Let's hope for their sake that they win and cover there. They're minus 30 or higher in both those games. But, you know, the committee's like, I don't know if you can penalize the team for not scheduling hard the non-conference, but on the other hand, if they beat every team they play, like, what can you do?
Yeah.
Like Kansas State was supposed to be better. They beat them on a neutral. Oklahoma, same conversation, same two teams we just talked about with the last team. New Mexico. Like these are top 100 teams that they're beating on neutrals, and then like the Creighton series, like Creighton was supposed to be better. That's at home. Like Creighton's gonna have to hold on for that to be quad two. Outside the top 75 is quad three at home. Um, Wisconsin at home too. Wisconsin seems like a bubble team. They're clearly above the bubble teams right now. That's
Yeah.
clear. It's whether this Illinois performance was something that they could replicate more often and they can get into that fourth, third, fifth range in the Big Ten, or whether this was just a little bit of a lucky win and they're more sort of towards the upper middle class level of the Big Ten. But depth, I think, will still be a problem for them. I was telling you before, Mike, they really play 7 players since Connor Sejan went out, and they don't play the fastest of tempos, so and they don't foul a ton. So from that point of view, like maybe they can get away with this, but I do think that might cost them if it comes to like trying to get that double bye in the Big Ten. Like getting top 4 this year will be extremely tough. I know they already have a win against Illinois, a team that we think will be fighting with them for that fourth or fifth spot. But I think to an extent we might see the record catch up just a little bit here with them. Like their first 3 games in the Big Ten, Michigan State at home, Ohio State away, Indiana away. Like there's a chance that those are 3 really tough quad 1 games, and they've only had one of those so far. But I think that's really it with Nebraska.
Yeah, I mean, just one other thing I'd say about Nebraska. If there's, there aren't very many more coaches in college basketball that I'd want to be leading my team coming down the stretch in a dogfight than Fred Hoiberg. He did an incredible job at Iowa State, brought them back to relevance, so that they are now at the spot that they are now. Then obviously took a couple of years off to go to the Bulls and has resurrected this Nebraska program to arguably unprecedented heights.
Yep.
Especially when you look at how bad Husker basketball has been over the last 20, 30 years. So, and you look at, his ability to close out games both at Iowa State and now at Nebraska. I mean, he's a coach that I want. If I'm within a possession or two in the last 4 minutes of a game, that's my guy, especially in the Big Ten.
Yeah, he is sort of. He was swimming against the current early at Nebraska. They did not have the NIL that some of the other Big Ten teams had. He's gotten that up, plus with revenue sharing. That's why he's starting to get a little bit closer here. And last year they didn't make it, but they did very well, and they may have. I think they won the crown, so they have the longest win streak in the nation here, going back to last year. But X's and O's wise, Joe and I have always been very complimentary of Hoiberg. There is a little bit of isolation ball base to it, but now that he has good players, like that's gonna work. Like that's how Calipari won all
Yeah.
those games with Kentucky before the transfer portal opened. It was find the matchup you like the best and let's rock and roll. Um, but the ease of some of these games is a little bit jarring. That okay,
Yeah.
you didn't. There were a couple bye games that were probably a little closer than they should have, but they they were the deserving winners here against Illinois. They led the whole game, and I know they hit sort of a tough 3 at the end to win it, but I think probably 70% chance they win the game in overtime. Illinois
Yeah.
had hit a huge 3 from a Visage to tie the game just before it. So I've been impressed with Nebraska so far, and I really am curious to see how high their ceiling is. But we do have a couple other games here, Mike. Let's talk about a team in the Big Ten, team that we already talked about. Previewing for this Saturday, it's the Indy Classic at Gainbridge Fieldhouse, and it's Stephen Pearl's Auburn Tigers going up to play Matt Painter and Purdue. We've talked about Auburn, solid team, probably a step below the elites. They're getting one here, Mike, in what's going to be another pretend neutral game, just a couple hours south of West Lafayette. But Purdue have bounced back well from that Iowa State game. Do you think they keep it rolling here, or could Auburn potentially cause some problems?
Look, I think Auburn could potentially cause some problems in this one. You look at it seems like we've had a little bit of inconsistency with Auburn. They had it going for a little while. They had a good rebound win against St. John's um, in Vegas, but then got absolutely run off the floor by a really good Arizona team. So I absolutely think they can give Purdue a run for their money. But Purdue in front of a home crowd, I know I said this about Iowa State. I don't think Auburn is Iowa State. Um, and I don't see anything else other than Purdue winning by 10 points. But I could see Auburn giving them a run for their money early in this one.
And Purdue has been just a little bit up and down. They were up by 3 against Minnesota the game after Iowa State. That first half was not sort of the response that they wanted, but then they got the response after halftime. They ended up winning by 28. And then with Marquette, they blitzed them early, and then the second half was essentially a push. They won it by 4, and then beat a Marquette team who Mike, we're probably not going to get to a ton of Big East talk tonight, but yikes, they are outside the top 50 and 150. Sorry, outside the top 150, and Marquette is 5-7 on the season. But
Yeah.
Purdue has proven that they're, they've had two home tests since Iowa State. They've come out, they've won by a lot. They were supposed to. I think they're still supposed to win this one, but you get Auburn to a neutral. It's a really good opportunity for something for the resume here. They already have a good resume, all that, but Auburn's going to stay in the top 50. So quad one game, and this was a game that they played last year, I believe, in Birmingham, and I believe Auburn won. So, or maybe I'm mixing it up with Alabama because they went to beat Alabama last year, but still, never mind. Good opportunity for Purdue here. I think they get the job done. I think Auburn's just kind of okay.
Yeah.
But all right, Mike. Well, we got a couple of other games that we're going to talk about here from last Saturday. Um, we had, actually not really Sunday. Sorry, turn the calendar to Sunday. Um, so I got the Big Ten feature on, so we're not seeing the games that I wanted to see. But
Didn't have much on Sunday. I think
yeah, it
Iowa
didn't have
State was
much on
our,
Sunday
our
either.
conference game.
But we have a couple big games this weekend. We're going to probably leave it here. Actually, you might see some mid-season all-conference teams from us, mid-season power rankings. We will try and get these. We're going to try and get a bonus video out while there's not many games, and then just like that, it's going to be conference play, Mike. So, any last words as we wrap up non-conference play?
Yeah, I mean, a couple of things. One, I think a game that I'm really excited to see this weekend is going to be Kentucky and St. John's. We've seen Patino play his former Kentucky Wildcats a lot when he was with Louisville. Now it's a little different, taking on a guy that he coached to a national championship in Mark Pope. So that's going to be a really fun one. That's going to be a good neutral game in Atlanta. And both teams really desperately looking for something. Look, St. John's, they're still ranked, but most of their big time games they have lost this year. And then you look on the flip side with Kentucky, man, they are just begging for something good to happen this year. You can't imagine getting into conference play at 7-5. That's going to be really tough to try to clinch a bid in really in March Madness unless they step up their game in SEC play. So this is a huge marquee game. And then going over some winners and losers so far. I think, you look at Nebraska as a huge winner so far. Obviously, Arizona has exceeded most of the country's expectations. The biggest loser so far, I think, so far in the non-con, and really as we concluded, has got to be the SEC. They came into this year with a lot of expectations going into the year, and they're kind of the third best conference in college basketball. And they're a lot closer to fourth with the ACC than they are the second with the Big Ten. So a lot of teams that have been surprisingly poor. I mentioned Kentucky already, but Florida has really yet to do anything of importance right now in the SEC. Arkansas has been good. Alabama's been pretty good, but overall, not even close to the same conference we saw a year ago that was so dominant. So the SEC, my big loser so far this season.
The middle of the pack in the SEC is not bad, Mike. All but two of their teams are ranked in the top 66, and A&M's 44. Like the middle of the pack is okay, but if like the top isn't as good as it's been. They
Here are
only
top
have
10 teams.
they have one top 10 analytical team, that is Vanderbilt, and if they stay there, that is great for them. And I don't think it's all that offensive to say that they probably won't stay there. But you have these Sweet 16 probable teams in there, Mike. I do agree. It's a little bit of a different league this year down there in the SEC.
Yeah, you look also like, Missouri, they're going to have a huge game on Monday, I believe, against Illinois, bragging rights neutral game in St. Louis. So they're going to have one more chance to get a big win, but Missouri really hasn't done anything special this year. They're two of their three Power Five games they lost against Kansas, who was a dominant loss. So
Yeah,
this
but
conference,
you'd have to think if these teams in there like LSU and Texas and Missouri, if they lose these games, Mike, and then they fall into that mid 40s to 50s range, that's Bubbleville right there. And
yeah,
Like they're
I
gonna
mean, I'll
have
tell
to
you right now, Texas is not a
they're
tournament
gonna
team.
have to punch
The
way above
analytics,
their weight in the SEC to
yeah,
even have a chance.
right now they're 0 for 4 in Power 5 games. They struggled in Maui. Look, Texas is not a tournament team.
Yeah,
Let's be real right now.
I
So,
think they've lost to teams that we think are on the bubble pretty significantly, and
yeah,
really the only team that like I think Auburn is will probably be a little bit better than they are. Georgia's solid, but I think LSU, Texas, Missouri, A&M, Oklahoma, I think they're all probably out. Florida's
yeah,
the only team there that I am not super worried with. Like they've kept a lot of these games against elite teams close, and like the analytics are there for if they turn it around, like they could be protected seed. Like
oh
it,
yeah, they got
like
to win them.
it's the opposite of what we were talking about with the record catching up with the numbers. It's the other way around here. Is the numbers going to catch up with the record? Uh,
Yeah,
the numbers still think that Florida's a top 20 team. I think that's probably true, but yeah, the SEC this middle of the pack, Mike, like they didn't have great non-cons, and unless they're there is a way for them to make the tournament, but they're without that elite team in the SEC. Is there that big win that could stand out on a bubble resume? I don't know.
yeah,
And then the other
I
yeah
totally agree.
the other conference you mentioned there's the ACC, and I just want to show how it matches up here. They're in a pretty good spot too, and
Yeah,
it froze. So give me a second to reset it. But they're like yin and yang right now with the SEC in terms of the analytics, and they have Duke at the top. So I think it's really possible for the ACC to be neck and neck with the SEC at the end of the day, which is ridiculous to think about
who would have thought?
where we are at
Yeah.
the beginning of the season. But how do you think obviously we have Duke and Louisville here at the top of the ACC, but how do you think the rest of it, shapes out here? They've got a chance to get a lot more tournament teams than we thought.
Yeah, I mean UNC has been way more impressive than we thought. They're sitting at 10-1 right now. They've got some good quality wins. UVA, new coach this year. They've been playing really well this year. They're going to have a fun one against Maryland. I think if they win that game comfortably, we start to feel even better about them. They have that loss to Butler, but aside from that, they've been better than expected. You look at Cal. Cal's been better. Notre Dame, I think, is a curious case. They could make some noise in the ACC. You never know. Virginia Tech is solid. Miami is solid. They've got a lot of good teams. They're not all going to make the tournament, but expect one of these teams that aren't Duke to make and not Louisville to try to make a run at the conference tournament or in the regular season as well. It's not just going to be Duke rolling through this conference, I don't think. I think there's going to be a couple of teams that are right now in that 3 to 7 mark that are going to be able to give Duke a run for their money, especially if they have a pretty easy conference schedule.
Yeah, they have put themselves in a much different spot than past years here, Mike, where we talked about ACC being like a 3 or 4 bid league. I know they've had some bids stolen here and there, and all things considered, they've been pretty good in March Madness, despite how not good they've been in the regular season. But this is a great development for this league. They've got 8 teams in the top 50, 11 teams in the top 70, and only 4 teams outside the top 100 right now. And for where like this league is, like has been the last couple of years, it's a great development for them. It seems like so far, Mike, just sort of going through all these conferences and looking at them side to side, Bubbleville's going to be really crowded this year.
Yeah.
Off the top, obviously a Duke or Louisville win probably separates these ACC teams away from an SEC team. Like the SEC teams don't like if they were to win at Louisville or versus Duke, I don't know if the SEC has that kind of win right now. But the ACC is in a great spot. I think we said it was probably going to have a better year than last year, but that doesn't really even begin to describe what's going down there in the ACC. But I think, Mike, we'll wrap it up here. Maybe a short pod to recap this weekend, then the bonus video. But going to be a while before we have a lot of games again. So thank you, everybody, for tuning in this year, and we'll see you next.